Remove carcinogens and get your gear compliant clean with Unimac laundry equipment. Find it at alliancelaundry.com/fire.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back. Tailboard Misfits podcast. We're here on Firefighter Nation. Today, we're talking with Josh of Forged and Unbroken. Man, I've been a follower of you for a long time on social media, really before I even took over Tailboard Misfits. And the content that you put out, I find is super interesting. And like, especially some of the workouts and stuff, like I feed off of that stuff. And I'm super thankful that you've taken the time out of your day to talk with me and just like spread the knowledge that you have, which is very valuable to us as firemen. And man, thank you for being here.
No, man, I appreciate it. I've always appreciated your support, like right out the gate. That means a lot, especially in this world we're living in. There's so many guys and gals putting out cool stuff. So it means a lot that you kind of grabbed on and have supported me as well. So thank you.
Yeah, I think what's important about that before we move on, just because it is social media, right? And everyone can have a voice, and myself included. Not saying that you shouldn't vet me, but like, I think you should definitely like vet the people that you're sharing content about or that you're buying into their content, because a lot of people, it could be opinion. And what I've noticed pretty quickly out of the gate with your content is a lot of it was like factual or data-based stuff. And it just makes sense, right? And I appreciate the context of everything, like the context you add to your post and the explanations of stuff that you put in there. Like that's really what gravitated me to that, because at the end of the day, you can't really argue data.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That was kind of one of my missions first coming out here, was that I've, through my background or training or just even my own self-improvement and wanting to create more awareness, is like, there's a lot of information out there. What is it saying? And I've learned a lot from so many other industries outside the fire service and brought it back in. I was like, there's nothing against anybody that's doing anything out there. I just didn't want to be like another fire page or another fitness page. I wanted to have just a little bit more oomph and ass behind it. So I thought that this would be an interesting way to put some of my experiences out there and some of the things that I've been fortunate enough to learn. And at the same time, it pushes me now, because now I have to be able to back up the things that I say, and I got to see what the research is saying. So I've done probably much more learning than educating, which has been cool too.
That's awesome. So real quick, Josh, if you don't mind, man, just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started in the fire service, and really like where you're at now.
Yeah, man. So I always thought actually I was going to get into like farming agriculture stuff. I grew up raising animals and did like 4-H things and hunting things. And I was involved in a couple gnarly situations as a teenager, where I had to help some friends out when other friends were kind of panicking and freaking out. And it kind of made me take a step back. I was like, maybe I got a little bit of a knack for this. So I joined the local volunteer firehouse in high school. And that would have been end of 2003. And then as soon as I graduated and got into college, I got the call for the county that I work for now. And I was originally an alternate that got picked up and started the career side of the academy. And so now I've got just over 20 years in the fire service total. I'll hit 20 on the career side next April, which is pretty cool. And also met some friends through that academy that brought me down to Prince George's County, Maryland. A lot of people know it's the 16th busiest department in the nation, I just found out, which is kind of cool. But I did a handful of years down there as well and learned a ton and got to meet some really amazing men. And yeah, I'm right smack dab in central Maryland. So we're really close to DC and Baltimore. And so a lot of my friends work in those jurisdictions, and occasionally we'll even run with them or run into PG or some of these other places. And I just got assigned back to one of my second homes, the truck company in central Howard County, and I'm the captain of Truck 7. So get to really enjoy hanging out with those guys and gals over there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think I've talked with a few people now from, obviously we're in different parts of the country. I'm down in Texas, but through the podcast and just through networking, like I've gotten to talk to several guys from up near that area, specifically like the PG County area. And it just means like, man, like I'm almost jealous of like the work you guys see. Like, it's just like every person I've met there is like, they fight fire, they go to fires. And like, at the end of the day, like just the way I describe it is like, they're firemen. And so I know you guys see your fair share of work up there, especially in that area. So I think that's also important, like context wise, right? Like a lot of the stuff that you're going to talk about or that you do talk about is based off of experiences backed with data. And not to steal Rob Ramirez's quote, but he says, data driven but street vetted, and I feel like that's a big part of what you do. And so I asked you to send me some talking points, really because I'm a dumb fireman, and while I do try to expand my knowledge, there's a lot of stuff like that you talk about that I find super interesting, and I'd love for you to lead into and talk about. And we talked about it a little bit just before now, and one thing you said that I wanted to hit on is just like a winning team and what that looks like, and what plays into that role individually and as a team aspect.
Yeah, sure. So I guess early on, starting things out, always you can't really get to a place without knowing what the expectations are. Not necessarily saying you have to have the end in sight, but we need to be focusing on what are the clearly articulated expectations. So whenever I come into a shift, or I try to get my expectations out there, say, hey, these are our values, these are our priorities, these are the things we're going to focus on. Here's how we can loosely construct our day so we can build our time around those anchors that we'll call them throughout the day. And here's how we're going to prioritize things. And here's how I expect to conduct yourselves. I have kind of like a sheet I've built up over the years, and we talk it out. So that way there's no questions. I don't want people guessing, me coming in there. There's always fear with a new guy coming in saying, how much change is going to happen, or I've heard this, or I've heard that. Like, let's just lay it all out. Like, I don't want confusion. So let's figure out where my priorities lie, and let's work together, because I want to know what their priorities are. Like, what things are really working really well that I shouldn't be messing with, I don't want to meddle with. Right. And then from there, just once you get past expectations and you start building a culture and a team together, you got to do hard things. So a lot of where my priorities lie is on the occupational training side of things. Get past the equipment checks, making sure everything's running right. Those are the essentials. But then the occupational based training, occasionally you get tabletops and talking points, and those things are good, and I'm all about it. But you got to get on the street in your gear and do hard things. I'm a big fan of the crawl, walk, run mentality. We'll start small, we'll build things up. We're hiring pretty much every year. We've been doing it for a while, so we're always having a slew of recruits. So we build up throughout a year. Another class comes out, we start right back at the beginning. We build up throughout the year, go right back to the beginning, and we just keep flip-flopping. So it keeps us fresh, but it's always a ramp up throughout the year. It's kind of a nice timeline. But it's interesting to see where I work. We'll have 10, 12, 14 people working at a day just in my firehouse. And so the human dynamic and human element is also at play. Human beings can be messy, and there's always personal and professional things going on. So you have to deal with that element. There's the element of the community and of up top leadership, the neighboring firehouse. There's all kinds of things going on. And we just have to be flexible and make things happen throughout the day and still provide a really awesome service to the community. I say that there's a high expectation placed on us, and I'm good with that. I think there should be a high expectation. We should come up to meet those demands. We have become kind of the jack of all trades, and there is no backup option, right? There is no second string. It is us. So we need to be able to perform and keep that expectation and provide a really awesome service. And the only way we're going to do that is constantly reevaluating what it is that we're doing, getting the sets and reps in, and then have really honest, frank conversations about where are we now? How can we improve on that? How can we get 1% better? Or do we just really just pull the pin on this thing, chuck the grenade, and do we really mess it up? Do we need to start and hit the reset button? And then just going through that, dealing with some really complex shifts and personalities and people. I did a lot of time in the union as well, in the executive board, managing politics and finances and things like that. Fireground survival instructor. I was able to pull from all these different areas, and I just got to experience a lot more, read a lot more, and that just got me down this road of, I started doing so much reading outside the fire service and then bringing it back in, and it totally changed the way I was doing things, because I realized that maybe I wasn't doing everything correctly. I was learning a lot from my mentors and from the fire service, but I started seeing what was happening in other industries, whether it be military or business. And I was like, oh, wow, we can actually take this. And it was making our teams better. I just threw a lot at you. Which way? Which way you want to go with this?
No, like there was a couple things that I would just like to highlight, because that's what I try to do in these conversations is just pull some of the things that hopefully other people see value in and that can do and that I find important. And one of them is like, I love the quote, like you can't change what's not measured, or something along those lines. And you having the list of expectations and what your crew, what you guys are going to do, like it's all out on the table. They know what to expect, and there's no, not saying there's no questions to be asked, but there's no question to be asked, at least of what is expected of you. And I kind of wanted to take that a step further. So you're a captain on a truck, and I'd just like to know, like you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but like on a day-to-day basis, like what is your priority at the firehouse? And I understand like calls and everything like that, but as it comes to like you and your crew, like what are your priorities for that day?
Yeah, so it's kind of a team effort. We have a 4-person truck, a 4-man engine, a paramedic ambulance, and a BLS ambulance. So all of us are in there together, and there's no line down the floor. We all collectively come together and figure out what we're going to have happen today. Sometimes the senior firemen are going to put the training together. Sometimes it's on the officers, but 6 a.m. in the morning, everybody's hitting the ground running. We're leaving the last shift. We're going through our equipment checks. We come around the kitchen table and we do transition. A lot of times I jump on like Zillow and I'll find a house on the first due and I'll pull up something crazy that I see. Oh, this person did this addition, or there's these crazy features, and this is going to affect fire behavior, and how are we going to deploy resources? So we have some conversation. We start working mental models of things we might encounter in our first due. We talk about whatever needs to be transitioned between other shifts. And then we hit the street. Like, I want to knock this thing out first thing in the morning. Let's get in gear and let's do something to make ourselves better. Sometimes the focus might be for the recruits and the younger people in the firehouse. Sometimes it might be a little bit more higher skilled, higher paced. If we can get out in the community and do those things, so we're not in like a concrete jungle of a firehouse, let's do that. And then we're running calls throughout. After lunch, we usually we get in the gym and we work out. That's the next priority. We do a shift-based training together. We make it work for everybody. So we preserve the stimulus, but we make it work within your capabilities. And then, we all have dinner together. We have those meals. And then a lot of times there could be battalion-wide training or a second party training that somebody's sponsoring. Like, we have our gas and electric company coming up that's going to be doing some training for the companies. So we're always jockeying around. Like yesterday, Hearst, we just bought all new electric Hearst tools for the truck for extrication stuff, whole new complement. So we dug in deep on that yesterday and had to do a bunch of work re-outfitting the truck. So between the training, the workouts, taking care of our people, those are like the anchors, right, throughout the day. And I told people just the other day, when we were on calls, like, yes, we're going to kill people with kindness. Sometimes we deal with some really hard personalities, but we can't, stoop. We can educate as best we can. And then the other thing I say is that I intend to put you in harm's way. I'm not going to do anything that I wouldn't do or that I personally have not done, but this is going to be a dangerous job. And like I said, there is no backup option. So I intend to put you in harm's way. So don't be surprised if I ask you to do some crazy things, because we're one of 3 truck companies in our jurisdiction, and they're going to ask us to do some things to make the problem go away. So let's go do that.
Yeah. And I think that kind of leads to just a different point. And I love everything you said. And there's actually a few things that I want to talk about, but real quick, that whole aspect of you having your crew and telling them, like, don't be surprised if I ask you to do some hard things. Right. And being able, and I get it, like at a point it comes from a level of trust, right? Like, they trust you as their company officer to know what you're talking about and saying, like, yes, it's going to be dangerous because we're firemen, but like, we're not going to go in there. You're not going to sentence them to like a death sentence, more or less. And
exactly.
I know you could probably speak on like, how does that happen? Like, how does your crew, and you can get as deep into it as you want to, really develop that, like, honestly, you say jump and they say how high type of thing. How did you guys develop that?
Man, it first starts with just a whole lot of trust and going back to those clear expectations, right? So here are the goals for whatever we're doing with this training. I'm very much, let's be process focused and not be outcome focused. A lot of people think about the end state. But when you really focus on the processes, you can really clean up what it is that you're doing. And then you get to a really successful end state because of really tight processes. So we try to root things out as we're doing them and focus on that and not getting super caught up on what's happening at the end. Big fan of the crawl, walk, run mentality, like I said. So forcible entry, for example, whenever we get the training prop in from the academy, we'll spend a couple weeks and we'll spend hours a day. Like, listen, we're going to be in street clothes and we're just going to talk about geometry and we're talking about physics. We're talking about single and person, two-person forcible entry methods. And we're going to start small. All right. The next week when we come in for hours at a time, now we're putting gear on, we're reducing mobility. Next week, now we're going to do the same thing. Now, here are tips and tricks. Here's little things that I've learned or these guys and gals have learned where we can do workarounds. We can push the envelope. These things don't typically work. You see this a lot. This actually is not a thing. You'll see this on social media. That is true. This thing is not true. How do we continue to build and develop? And I just ratchet up the stress, right? By the end of it, we black out all the windows in the engine bay. We have a narrow hallway prop. We have stairs going down, so it's simulating a walk-up basement, tight access, 3 a.m. in the morning. And then we do sledge swings. We might do a lap around the building. You might do farmer's carry because that's what's going to happen on the fire ground. Your adrenaline's going to be up, heart rate's going to be up, breathing rate's going to be up. And then I make people go through two-person and single-person, inward and outward, and it's 100% success rate. I think all too often people want to start in that end state. And what they realize is that you lose trust. A lot of fear actually has started. I've experienced that a lot, even from a 2-year guy upwards of a 20-year guy. You say, hey, we're going to go do this hard thing right out the gate. You lose people and they get scared because of maybe another officer was trying to do something and flex on them. Or maybe they thought that they already had the skills and really they didn't. So if everybody starts at the same page, step one, and we build up together, we build trust, we create more awareness. We learn other people's roles within that community. So then it's really easy for somebody else to step up if somebody else is off. And that has developed 100% success on the back end of these more stressful high-end evolutions, high skill evolutions. And then you do that. That's just one example of forcible entry. You do that with hose line deployment. We do that with ladders, and then you really get into the weeds and nuance of things. We'll do, all right, well, how do we rack this bumper line? All right, now how do we extend lines? So slow, smooth, fast. Our slow becomes actually quite fast. It's not hasty. It's aggressive. It's a really good high operational tempo. And then we become the company that's trusted when we go out to these challenging fires and they say, hey, that engine and truck, I know they can make the problem go away. We might bypass another company because they're going to be able to take care of this issue. And that's what we're trying to develop in our people.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the trying to be, and it all plays into it, but if the end goal for you is to be that go-to crew, everything that you said is how you have to develop it. And you kind of just gave me some ideas to work through, in my own personal, job and crew and stuff like that, because you're right. A lot of times it's, sometimes we show them what the end state should look like. But then we kind of just say good luck and just throw them to the sharks or whatever. And so being able to do even being cognizant of the crawl, walk, run thing, the crawl just looks a little different than what you're talking about, and now it's something that people can implement. And, man, I can tell you this, it seems like the people that I talk to and the people that I know, even at my own department, those crews that really they really have that bond, and they might be the definition of brotherhood, and they're hanging out off shift, and man, they perform well. And and I'm kind of curious on your take of it, because like you just said, you do work for a busy company and a busy department. For me, those are the guys that I see that do have that unit cohesion, and they do work well together, and everything I just said, they're typically at these busy stations where they're doing the whole shared suffering thing, and they're getting the floor mopped with them every single shift, but yet they're the strongest crews out there. And it's just I just speak to your experience on that and what you think there.
Oh man, 100%. There's totally something with I'll talk the officer side of it for a second first. That buddy to boss mindset, that switch that you have to make, and that is a real thing. And when there is a lot of trust there, uh, the guys who were my friends and peers are my friends and peers are not going to put me in a bad situation, and vice versa. And at the same time, we are paramilitary, but we're in this weird environment where we're not super strict on the military structure, right? And so things can be a little bit more lax, which I think maybe creates a little bit more of a bond there. You know, we are typically working in teams, and I think it is a hallmark of a healthy shift when they take care of problems immediately. They have hard conversations with each other and with themselves to improve. It's not unheard of for the firefighters to kick the officers out and say, hey, we got something we're going to take care of. We need you to get away for a minute. And they take care of the problem themselves, and they come out and they open those doors like, all right, hey, we're good. We're on the same page now. Let's go get back on the grind, which I think is amazing. And when you can sit there and a couple times throughout the year, not just, a lot of people do the Christmas party, but outside of that, like, hey, let's go play golf. We're going to go to this person's house for the summer party. We're going to go do this event. Hey, the wives and the kids know each other's names. They're calling and talking to each other, and they're hanging out. That is a massive hallmark for team trust and compatibility and togetherness. And when you have that, that will be replicated on the fire ground. And when you're in those really high stress situations, there's no doubt that, hey, I got your back, because I know your kid's name. I know your wife's name. I know that somebody in your family just passed away and I was there at their viewing. That is super powerful. That is very profound. And so when it could be really easy to chuck the deuces and check out in a hard situation, these guys and gals are not going to do it, because there's so much more at stake, because they're more invested. And I think there is something to that shared suffering that you were talking about. It doesn't matter if it's an ancient text or if you're somebody who's very spiritual and it's found in some spiritual dogma. Like, a lot of these texts talk about endurance and embracing that struggle. That's just life, right? It's going to happen. If life is easy for you, you probably haven't had a very real one. And when you get to go through that shared struggle with your people of the 6 after midnight calls, and you're sitting up eating like cereal at 4 a.m., just laughing with each other. You're watching the sun come up as you're running down the road. It changes you. Yes, it's hard on your body and mind, and you can't do that every single shift for 30 years. Is going to be a slow death. But those are the things that create that camaraderie, create that trust. And you got to root out the cancers quick, right? So misery loves company. It just takes one person to mess that up. And I've certainly been parts of shifts where that has happened. And sometimes as an officer, it's a heavy lift to either fix that issue or get them gone. But that's what's necessary, because just one person can really mess that up, especially if it's coming from the leadership side of things. But no, you nailed it, man. Like, it is usually the busiest ones. We got some slow houses that work great together, and it's even more imperative for them to stay on top of their stuff. But man, that's a hallmark for the healthy shift.
Yeah, and that, for just in case, like the slow houses, I'm not saying anything about them, but you said it just there, like they do have to be a lot more intentional about like the trust that they build, and it has to be, I don't want to say fabricated, but you have to just be intentional about it, and it might not necessarily be on calls, it might be through workouts or just intentional relationship building. But something you said, and one of the company officers at my department, and we've explained it, the whole buddy to boss thing. And he explained it to me this way, because we had a conversation about it. And he was like, if you and I are friends, right? But I am your company officer, you're not going to want to let me down. And you alluded to that, or you said that just now. Yeah. And it's just like, okay, if I have a relationship with him, if I care about him, he cares about me, I know we're friends. Like, I want to make him look good. I don't want to make him look bad. Like, I don't want him to get in trouble by his boss. But if you kind of have that disconnected company officer, at the end of the day, like if you mess up and you make them look bad, it's almost like no big deal. Like, they're not your friend. They're just, your boss. And I like that part. Like everything you just said, it just really drives home. Like for me, and I like in my shoes where I'm at, I'm a fireman. Like that's what I'm looking for in a company officer, someone to build a relationship with and to be able to have that, mutual agreement with, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good word for it.
Yeah, I love it. And we kind of get into the shared suffering and like the emotional and physical stress of being at a busy house, and things that you could do to prep yourself mentally and physically. And I know that something you're passionate about is just like the physical stress that you may put your body through to be more prepared for some of the things we encounter at work. And so I would love to let you speak on that, because it's something I know you could probably talk a bit on.
Sure. Well, I'll kind of tie a couple like physical and mental together to start things out, right? So just digging into the reading, there was a IAFF study done in 2008 of like 3,500 personnel, I think. It was metro departments, and they were trying to figure out what were some trends with people who were getting injured and fireground injuries. And the 11 to 20 year firefighter was the most likely person to suffer an injury on the fireground. And the main causes was human error, lack of situational awareness, and poor decision making. The 0 to 10 year firefighter was a very close second. And then when you spread things out, if you had over 20 years, the most likely cause of injury was lack of physical fitness, wellness, or fatigue on the fireground. And that's what got you injured. Now, here's the crazy thing is that when you look at, well, that's number one for both categories. What's number two? All they did was flip flop. So you had like 10 reasons why people were getting injured on the fireground. So no matter where you're at in your career, it's poor decision making, human error, lack of situational awareness, lack of physical fitness, wellness, and fatigue. So those two main categories are the main reasons from 0 to 20 years why you're getting injured on the fireground. We can overcome all of those things, right? That is on us. That is our fault. That's nobody else's fault. We can't blame anything or point the fingers. It's not technology. It's not equipment. It's not gear. That's on us, and that's something that we can control. So when you start spreading out, what do we do to affect those things? We'll just talk on the mindset side of things for a little bit. There's normalization to deviance. There's cultural norms that we need to fight and defy. I work in some jurisdictions near me that they're not good at talking about line of duty deaths that they've experienced. They shut them down quick. And they say, no, we don't talk about those things. Other neighboring departments put out all the information, and they try to do as much as they can to learn and grow from that. That's just one small example. Another example, just inside the firehouse, before I got my spot, I was a float officer. I'd come in and, from multiple shifts of officers checking their BA in the morning, they never topped it off. We have 4,500 PSI cylinders that you can put up to 4,800. And I come in and it's at 3,500 and the cylinder wheel isn't attached. So that's normalization. We have made a deviant behavior and attitude normal, and that's not okay. So how do we fight that? And sometimes it's a small conversation, and sometimes it spreads out and it causes a lot more issue, right? There are so many other things. Speaking about mindset, open and closed mindset, there are people that have the victim mentality like we talked about. The example I used the other day with Mike Nasty from Tip of the Spear was like, you can have two athletes the exact same, and they've researched this really well. The person that comes to the next obstacle that they've never experienced, the one that says, oh man, I've never done this before, but I know that I can do this, or I'm looking forward to the opportunity to learn and grow, compared to the one that's like, man, this is bullshit. Why is this happening to me? I've never done this before. Nobody's taught me this. I'm not prepared. How could this happen to me? The one that has the positive open mindset almost all the time will just run circles around the negative closed mindset. And that happens on the fireground. We get into a bad spot, and I've seen it. People start talking shit on themselves in their mindset. Maybe they call out somebody else in an improper way, in a negative way. And you just watch like this negative cascade of emotion. And then that leads into how they act. And on the training ground, hopefully you can root that out quick. But it's the people that just give up in fires, right? It's because of that negative mindset. So staying open and prepared for that is absolutely huge. I've seen that with my kids. I've seen teachers talk to kids. It's like, hey, I use the example of my second grader. They were doing a presentation. Every kid was so amped and stoked to do stuff. And the teacher was like, hey, this is this can be really scary. I got your back, but people are nervous and they're scared, and it's okay if you start trembling. I'm here for you. and you just watch every single kid drop off and immediately get timid. Their eyes went to the floor, all because that teacher planted the seed. Before that, they were super stoked and excited and were beaming with joy. And we do that to our own people all the time. So just that little shift in mindset and behavior can make a huge change. I was mentioning before, when you're in hot environments, there's a strain on the prefrontal cortex. So there, you actually have rushed decision making, and you become much more impulsive and you make more shortcuts. So that's what we do on the fire ground. We're in hot environments. We have the heat burden of the gear that's more taxing. So I have like a million different directions I go with, like the physiology side of things, but going and then like switching to the physical fitness side of things. There are two differences between the stresses we face. So one of what I just talked about was psychological and how we manage adrenaline. The other piece being the physically induced stress. So the examples I use are, you could be running a sprint, all out effort, and you have a high heart rate, high breathing rate, you feel taxed. You could be sitting completely still in fear, trapped in a stairwell. You're not moving at all. You're not physically taxed, but you have a high heart rate and high breathing rate because of the adrenaline dump and the cortisol dump that you experience in that event. The thing here, though, is that there's an amplifying effect. So what happens is they one up each other. And when we're at what I call in extremist environments, you're in a position where if you may have someone who's really physically fit, but they don't have the expertise to overcome that situation. So when in these situations, you still are going to make bad decisions and you may not be able to get out of that environment. You flip it, you could have all the expertise in the world to get the skills to get you out. But if you're not physically fit, you are now still a liability, because we have people that go into cardiac arrest. They burn off all their energy stores because of all the work they're doing and because of the heat environment. So you burn energy quicker. So we have firefighters, I think 12% of medical maydays are diabetic episodes, high heart rate and breathing rate, heat stroke, and because they can't overcome that physical burden. So the argument I'm trying to make and the change I'm trying to put out there is that we need firefighters that aren't just experienced, that have the expertise, and they are also somebody that is physically prepared for the job. So when everything hits all at once, the cascade of adrenaline and emotion and heat and metabolic burden that we're facing, it all comes together and we can overcome these situations, come out unscathed, and make the problem go away. And I think a lot of people underestimate the stressors that we actually have. They're like, oh, I can run a marathon. But if you can't deadlift your body weight plus your buddy, you're still a liability. Right.
You have to be well-rounded, right? Like, I think that's a pretty good way of explaining it. You mentioned like the tax, like that your prefrontal cortex goes under, like during it, while you're in heat environments or hot environments. And I would love for you to elaborate on that, just to like maybe people can like understand what happens, because I think that you could prep yourself for the mental part of it through the resiliency training and doing hard things and stuff like that. But as far as like what happens to your brain specifically, like, can we control that? Is it just something that happens and we have to mitigate it? Like, just speak on that for a second, just so we can get a better understanding.
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple things that are happening right there. So yes, when you're in hot environments and when there's a heat burden, your prefrontal cortex, especially the left side of the prefrontal cortex, starts going to more impulsive route. Like you shortcut decision making. The executive function, your prefrontal cortex is usually executive function, high cognitive learning, multi-step, high disciplined thinking. So when you're stressed, that goes out the window. When you're in high heat environments, that goes out the window and you could become much more impulsive and are more likely to skip steps. But high intensity interval exercise is something that actually boosts BDNF, which is the brain derived neurotropic factor. You will actually learn to light up the prefrontal cortex so you have better decision-making powers. So when one person is in that stressful environment and they're likely to come down and have deleterious effects, if you've been training, you've done one really hard occupational training, so you have the expertise, and if you've done the high-intensity interval training, the research shows, and is backed up through studies, that you actually learn to grow and nurture that part. So you have clearer thinking, higher level decision making, and you can remain calmer in those high stress, high heat, physically and emotionally burdened environments. There is, what was the other one? Oh, the AMCC, the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. Huberman talked about that. I started reading in on the research, and that's one of those areas where originally, primally, how it came about, what they think is what was happening was it was a way to save you from calorie burden, right? If something was scary and bad, that usually meant you had to expend calories, which could have been the thing that killed you. So if something was super negative, that AMCC lights up and like, hold on, this probably isn't good for us. What they're finding out now, though, is that when you do hard things, when that AMCC lights up, you actually learn to grow and nurture that. You have higher resilience. You're able to tolerate more stress physically and emotionally. And you now have better grit, perseverance, and you have greater bandwidth for more struggle. So my 1 to 10 may be far greater than somebody else's 1 to 10 scale of difficulty. So we're just talking about the brain right now of we haven't even talked about lungs, heart, muscles, or anything like that. This is just what's happening to us cognitively, psychologically, and how do we grow and back that up through exercise? And that's through hard training and hard workouts.
Yeah. And I'm a Huberman fan. I recently found him, and granted, I have to Google a lot of the words that they say on that podcast, but like
right.
It is actually a really good podcast, and I've learned a lot in that specific episode. I think it's super interesting. Like, I wouldn't let the big words scare you from listening to it. Like, you're referencing the one with David Goggins, and it was eye-opening to hear because I'm not the fittest person in the world, but I have made a commitment to do hard things. And so I have put myself in positions to do those things. And I've noticed like a noticeable change, like that the wins more or less have stacked on top of each other. Yeah. And it was just gratifying to hear that there was science that backed it up. Like, it makes sense. And it's just like, okay, this wasn't just a fluke. Now there's like a steamroller effect, and it's just going to continue to go and go. And so that's why I asked that question, is because I think it's important for people to hear that, like, yes, this stuff is happening to you physically, and it might cause some psychological effects, but you're not like SOL. Like, these are things that you can work on and really mitigate, and not necessarily throw it out of the way, but you can always improve on them. And just like you said, through the hard things, and it builds resiliency and stuff like that. So, we get into these tough situations, and honestly, you just picture like your worst day, right? And your worst day might be a Mayday. You're probably taxed out. Making a bunch of assumptions here is just like it's bad. And we've kind of already talked about it, but like, there's certain things that are going to happen further than just your brain. They come out as physical things that happen to us, and I would like to hear like you speak on that. Like, yes, we just talked about what happens in the brain, but how does that get out to your limbs and your hands? And I know it affects the motor function and stuff like that.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different routes we'll take it. We'll start on like the heat burden side of things, since I've already kind of touched on that.
Yeah.
When we're in our gear, we're in hot environments. So there is the external environment that we got to deal with, depending on your location or what the season is. There's the heat burden of wearing our gear. Obviously the superheat environments that we're going into. And then there's also the metabolic burden. So when we do work in our gear, that's an amplifying effect on top of all those factors. So it's very common for us to really increase our core temperature. It's very common for us to get in the low 100s. And once we get above 104 core temp, that's when we start having heat stroke symptoms. And that's when our bad processing of information starts happening. We have the heat stroke symptoms. I've had a ton of people bow out. Or maybe I've had to bench them because they're just not capable of doing work. One research study showed that even after you come out of a fireground environment and you take off your gear, your core temp will still rise for another 5 to 10 minutes after that. So you think you're in the clear, you could still be rising. If you're on the cusp, you think you take your gear off, you're going to start cooling, you might still go up for another 10 minutes and get above that 104 mark. and systems are going to start shutting down. Organ failure is going to happen, poor decision making, less workload, all those things. So these are things that we got to fight. These are things that we got to overcome. Going towards, like, we'll say, like the aerobic and muscular fitness, there is a lot of people hear of like their max heart rate. We got to use it for NFPA 1500 for the Bruce protocol. That's kind of that play a little bit. It was based on faulty data. I wanted to know where this came from, so I started digging into it. It was from the early 1900s, like World War I era, and it was kind of numbers that were just kind of loosely made up. And so when we hear max heart rate, for me, you know, I'm 38, 220 minus your age, just for loose numbers, it was at like 178 or something like that. I'll hit 178 in workouts all the time. And people are like, whoa, that's your max heart rate. You got to stop there. That's BS. Like, I've got data from guys that are sharing it with me, and even myself, where they're in controlled environments. We're hitting workouts. If I have something really hard, I'll get above that. If we have working fires, if we have Mayday situations, if we just have highly emotionally charged situations like wrecks with entrapment, people are getting way above this max heart rate. No problem. And that could be just from the adrenaline.
Yeah.
So when we create this awareness around our minds and bodies are going above what the textbooks say they should be going above, and that's just where we operate on any given day, we have to know what that feels like. And there are a lot of people that will work out for the first time, maybe doing something more, a little intense, more grunt workish. And they're like, oh man, I think I'm going to die. It's like, no. You're not even on the cusp yet. This just feels uncomfortable. And there's a difference between being hurt and being injured and being uncomfortable. We got to push past this. So that way, when you are really in the bad shit, you know what it feels like and you know how much you actually have in the tank. People should know what it takes to redline. And I'm not saying that 7 days a week, 365, you're redlining. That's not good for your body. But I would definitely tip the scales towards probably the majority of your workouts need to have a really high heart rate. And like a higher muscular load, because that's the environments that we're going to be in, right? Yeah. And then there's something you want to take a step down from that. I'm totally nerding out. I'm throwing so much at you.
I'm loving it. So get going. Keep going.
So there's the high heart rate. That's your aerobic threshold. But I'm sorry, your anaerobic threshold. But then there's this thing called the anaerobic aerobic threshold. So you take your max heart rate and then you drop like another 20 beats off of that. So your body uses three main energy pathways to fuel workouts. It's aerobic with oxygen. That's like you just taking a light jog and you can go for like 30 plus minutes. Mm-hmm. There's anaerobic, and there's two subsystems. It could be naturally occurring creatine in your body, or it could be the sugars that are occurring in your body from food that you've ingested that powers the workout. Those are used during high intensity work. That's the anaerobic without oxygen. So these are in shorter duration, high intensity work. That threshold is where oxygen has to switch over to anaerobic without oxygen, is your max heart rate minus your age minus like another 20 beats off of that. So now the threshold is even lower. So when people talk about like zone 2 training, or I'm just going to do some light cardio, yes, we need that. We need that foundation. We need that base. But for me, now I'm talking like high 140s. Like I might do that just running to my mailbox, doing some wind sprints. I'm not in gear. Like we are well above that. A friend of mine just shared their data with me from a wreck with entrapment where they had to do a bunch of ALS work. They're not in gear, and their heart rate was in the 160s. Another buddy who was doing work on a fallen firefighter during a line of duty death. The firefighter passed a couple of days later. There was a bluebird sky middle of the day. Just from the adrenaline of the incident, and then also doing EMS care on the fallen firefighter, his heart rate was in the 160s, 170s. So by textbook standards, that's high intensity work. That's up at your max heart rate for his age. And that's just where we need to live on all of these calls. Yes, it's emotionally stressful. Yes, it's physically demanding. But these are the things that we encounter day in and day out of our professions. And I think people are really underestimating the metabolic and emotional burden that is placing on your bodies. And my call to action is just, you got to prepare. You got to prepare. You got to push the envelope. And here's the research and data that shows that, yes, it's totally capable. It's totally within our abilities, and we can control as many factors as we can. Going back to what you said about Just operationally, once you get above 145 beats per minute, you start going towards condition black, which is Colonel Grossman's work, which was actually based off of Bruce Siddle's work from the Korea War era. That's when fine motor skills start going out the window. And so that's where we see firefighters ripping off safe pieces, ripping off their gloves, because their fine motor goes to gross motor skills and they don't know how to overcome that situation. Extensive training with high heart rates is how you overcome that, simply put. Once you get above 175, which is where we live a lot of times on working fires or crazy situations, that's when things really go out the window. And the only way that you will get out of that situation is if you have extensively trained in high stress environments and can physically and metabolically, emotionally handle those situations and have prepared for it before it happens.
Yeah. And so I have a couple questions just purely based off what you just said.
Yeah.
One, it seems like, I feel like the fire service is getting better about this information getting out, because you're one of many people I know that talk about this and preach about it and are actually like very squared away. Like the good thing I like about it is like the data's there and the research there, and the people that are talking about it are saying the same things. There's not like, in just the people that I've seen, at least, there's not contradicting statements or thought processes on this stuff. It's a general consensus, but you are collecting data right now from people. How are you collecting that data? In case someone else wants to get with you and share, or like someone wants to start it up themselves, like how are you collecting?
Yeah, no, hey, I really appreciate that opportunity. So there's a couple ways. One of my favorite and something I'm using, and I got this from a lot of my friends that are out there, is through Whoop. Whoop is a metabolic tracker that does so many things. Like, yes, it's tracking heart rate and blood oxygenation and stress and work, which is phenomenal, but it's also tracking things like sleep and recovery, heart rate variability. It's also, you can enter daily logs to see the negative impacts of working night shifts, drinking alcohol. I know for me that if I drink, it doesn't matter if I have one beer or 14, like I know that I have it at a minimum of 7% less resiliency the next day, whether that's through physical, mental, emotional means. Like just the information they give you is just absolutely phenomenal. If most people haven't made the switch, that I highly recommend it. There's discount codes and all kinds of stuff. It's great information. Another thing, a lot of people have Apple Watches. A lot of people just look at, okay, well, this is my heart rate, average heart rate, max heart rate. That's all good information. If you dig into your health app and dig a little bit deeper and go through some of the different channels they have, if you find your METs, the metabolic equivalent, that gives really good information. So when you go to a house fire, you run a high stress, high acuity call, dig into your Apple Watch and you can find, I want to know what your average heart rate was working throughout the entire incident. I want to know what you peaked at, your high heart rate. And then I also want to know what your metabolic equivalent was, which is basically the metabolic demand placed on your body, taking in all the factors like blood pressure, heart rate, breathing rate. Because that same incident I talked about earlier, the person did a CrossFit workout in the morning. That was 8 METs. Another later in the day, same person did the ALS call. That was 10, 12 METs. A couple hours later, then they had a house fire where there was a ton of running on a really hot day in gear. That was 20 METs. Wow. So now you've more than doubled what a CrossFit workout was. And that's because of the mental and emotional, physical burden being in PPE on a hot day does to you. Anything over 16 is considered like higher intensity, like intermediate to advanced work. And anything over 25 is like all out. So just on your Apple Watch, you can pull this data because it's recording all the time as long as you're wearing it. So Whoop and Apple Watch are two really awesome avenues. And yeah, again, thank you for the opportunity. If anybody's willing to share your data with me, if you run something crazy and you can track that data, like, wow, this is really good information. I would love to have it because I'm using it for training. I've been compiling stuff. And what we're finding out is like, it defies everything that people are telling us. Like there's a big stress placed on us and we got to prepare.
Yeah. I wear a Garmin and I don't know if I'm going to look at it, later and see. I don't know if you know, but I'm going to see if it has those. It measures a lot of stuff, but
Yeah. So I'm not as familiar with Garmin. There's probably something in there, especially if Apple Watch is doing it. I know Garmin
Right.
squared away. There's probably some metric somewhere in there that talks about METs or something.
Yeah, I'm gonna look it up.
Check it out. That'd be cool.
The other question I have is, I don't think it's controversial, but like I just know people that like don't necessarily do it or agree with it. Do you advocate for training and working out in gear?
Yeah, so I take kind of like I kind of split the middle of the road here on this one. So me personally, I don't do a lot of my actual physical workouts, exercise in gear. I do it. The majority of my training though is not in gear. And that I will never talk smack against anyone. So many people I rub elbows with and respect are doing it. It's all over social media. Like I love it. I support them. Me personally, it's not for me. My reasoning is that most of my occupational on the floor training is done in gear. So I'm still getting sweaty. I'm still there's still heat acclimation happening. There's still a burden. I'm doing the occupational stuff in gear. I'm running calls all throughout the day. Getting in and out of sweaty gear all day is like, obviously fun. But the other side of it also is shortened range of motion and mobility. No matter what anybody says, your range of motion and mobility is going to be restricted. And for me personally, I want to be able to maintain that flexibility. So many shoulder, knee, back injuries are happening because firefighters have a poor range of motion, poor mobility. And over time, when you shorten your levers, your body starts to adjust to that.
Right.
So I'll have people that like, I call them bro ups, like the people that do pull ups but don't have the full range of motion. Like they don't lock out their elbow or they don't pull the way up. You're kind of doing that in your gear sometimes. Or maybe it could be something as simple as I can't get my arm fully locked out behind my head past my ear. A lot of people, it's sticking out in front of them. So in gear, that's a lot harder. And so you're training, just an example, for your bicep to shorten. And then come a year later, your body starts to normalize that. And then bam, you get a bicep tear.
Yeah.
So that's my personal opinion. Like I said, I will never throw shade or dissuade anybody from working out in gear. That's just my personal belief. I'm in gear a ton already. I want my workouts to be in PT clothes. I'll still work out. I'll still do it occasionally. Just over the weekend, we were running steps in gear. That was part of our workout, but that's not where the majority of it's going to lie for me.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not like this super experienced like gear workout person by any means. I think within the last year, I've really tried to up the amount of gear workouts that I did, but that was coming from absolutely none. But I would side with exactly what you said. Like some of the more like stairs or, maybe even like sledge hits and stuff like that. Like I'll do in gear, but especially when it comes to like strength, which I don't think anyone's going to argue that. I've seen people like lifting weights in gear and stuff, but like I'm not doing that in gear. Personally, like I'm just not. So right. No, I was just curious. So I do want to move on because I know all of this stuff played a role, and that was super great information. I loved every bit of it, but I'm also like an undercover like nerd when it comes to that stuff. But I know like everything we've already talked about kind of led into this, and you were involved with an LODD, and I'll throw a plug out there because this is where I heard about it. And you were on the Fit to Fight Fire podcast with John Sparrow, and you guys go in depth and obviously a different avenue with it, with Nathan Flynn. And you were, if I'm not mistaken, and I would love for you to give an overview because you probably know it better than I do. But from what I remember, he was on in a big house, something that I would consider a McMansion that might be fairly normal for where you're at. And he fell from the first floor into the basement. And you guys were assigned to, or you were essentially part of the rescue group trying to attempt rescue for him, correct?
Yeah. And I can do a really quick overview. We do deeper dives. I've done it with Traditions Training and with John from Fit to Fight Fire and Danny with Student of the Game, and even my own podcast. We did a deep dive, myself and one of the command officers there. So if you want to get more in depth and hear that story, the information's out there. But just quickly recapping, it was a 8,000 square foot home, massive home. Lightning strike ignited CSST line, which started a fire that burned unchecked for almost an hour before the box alarm was dispatched at 2 a.m. in the middle of the summer. I was one of two RIT team leaders. It was actually the same house I'm at now. I was a lieutenant on the engine. and the captain on the truck company together, like our house. We ended up becoming the RIT team. Long story short, after the Mayday was sounded. Mayday sounded about an hour, 15, 20 minutes after the lightning strike hit and started the fire. It was probably about 15 to 20. It was about 25 minutes of on-scene time. And Nathan Flynn went into the main level of the home and then fell into a hole that had burnt through and fell into a crawl space. We thought it was the basement.
Okay.
It was actually 1,000 square foot crawl space. A very long story short, once we were able to deploy in, we went in through the basement, found the crawl space. On our way to get Nate, myself and a couple other members of the team got trapped because through an entanglement. We managed the entanglement. My lineman did an amazing job. He opened the line. So an hour and 20 minutes into the incident, he was the first water on the fire at all. And myself and my lineman at the time, Andy, and all these guys are like some of my closest friends. Andy went up and actually was the first one. Nate got him, packaged him, brought him out. We brought him out together, and the entire engine and truck team got him out with the help of a secondary RIT team once we got into the main part of the structure. So it's one of these events that was, man, Murphy's Law. Everything happened all at once. Like, you're talking about so many cards stacked against you in the deck, man. Super high adrenaline, super high emotion, super high physicality of the incident. You know, I say I was working within 90%, 95% of my overall work capacity. You know, I've been doing CrossFit since 2007. I've been a fitness trainer and CrossFit trainer since 2010, 11. This is something that I believe in and live. I've been a fireground and survival instructor since like 2012-ish. Like, I've worked in incredibly busy houses, like nothing compared to the culmination of everything happening all at once, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, metabolically, all of it.
You're right.
Being trapped, trying to find your fallen comrade, who was also my academy mate. We went through the academy together in 2005. Knowing that he's married with 5 kids at home. Like, there's so much at play here. So to be able to overcome that situation, after we got out of the crawl space, one thing I like to throw in there was we exited the crawl space with Nate, got him to his own awaiting EMS crew, and the crawl space that we were in collapsed within about a minute to a minute and a half of us leaving it. So you talk about occupational prowess, tactical proficiency. If my backup guy didn't manage all the kinks in the line, if our search procedures were poor, if we did not manage the entanglement, you could add 10 seconds to every single little tactic that we had to use. No problem. You think about people we see on the drill grounds or just in the firehouses. It takes one team 60 seconds. It takes another team 5 minutes. Within 60 to 90 seconds of us leaving, there could have gone from one dead fireman to another 7 or 8. And that's the reality of this situation. And I'm not trying to play on emotions here. I'm just trying to keep it real, you know. Adam St. John and guys like Craig Matthews and our Fire Marshals Bureau and the ATF did a phenomenal job putting information out there on this fire, so you can hear more about it. But a lot of things happened all at once, but it was because of the upfront investment, as my buddy Roger Steger says, the upfront investment that everybody had on that crew and still continues to this day, of doing the hard training, trusting each other, putting each other in hard situations. You get to the point to where you don't have to say anything and you know what to expect out of the other person, because you know the roles and the responsibilities and the proficiency and the expertise out of every person on that team. So it cuts down on communication and you all just go and you can go act. And that's what was happening that night. And so reflecting back on that now, you can see where we talk about all the physiology. I know we just really briefly touched on just the organizational and personal and individual leadership and the psychology that happens when we're doing these hard things. There's a lot at stake, and it forces us to be reflective and like, all right, what made us successful and how can we continue down that path? And so that's been a lot of my work and passion and call to action for everybody else that's out there right now.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the main reasons I really wanted to highlight, you know, this event is because just like you just explained perfectly, like everything that we've just talked about previously, like played a role in this fire. And throw out the Mayday and the LODD and the rescue. Like you said it, but Murphy's Law was already happening. That fire was burning. You guys were behind the 8 ball with the fire as it was, and it's not your fault by any means, right? Like, just like you said, the other thing that I wanted to throw out there, and you did say it, is they did make a documentary over this CSST. I think I got that right. Corrugated stainless steel tubing, and there's another LODD associated with another fire exactly like this, and they made a documentary over both of them. And it gives so much information.
It does. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off. And that both of them mean so much to me. One, because I was intimately involved in as one of the RIT team leaders. The other one, I literally drive down that road multiple times a week because it was right down the street from my house. Wow. And it was almost the exact same fire. And again, plugging my own stuff, I got to talk to TJ Brewer, who was one of the RIT team members on that fire, Battalion Chief Josh Laird. The anniversary was just a couple of days ago. It was August 11th or 12th. Mm-hmm. And I got to talk to both Nate Flynn's wife and Josh Laird's wife on the podcast. So you want to talk about just amazing women, and they're doing amazing work now with the Phoenix Advocates. I just want to give them a shout out because they're putting the information out there of, one, not just their experience as wives of the fallen, but also they're not letting their death be in vain. Like, they're educating on the CSST. They're educating on just the legal financial aspect of suffering a line of duty death. Like, they learned so much because the paperwork wasn't in order. So their mission in life now is to make firemen safer. They're literally changing laws and regulations in Maryland to change CSST laws so this doesn't happen again. And they're helping out the families because they're making sure that their paperwork is in order so they don't overcome, or so they can overcome the struggles that they had to face. Yeah. And I was so fortunate to be able to speak to other RIT team members and the wives of the fallen on my podcast, because they have incredible messages, and I can't understate that enough.
I would also suggest people, we've probably given several suggestions on this episode, but go listen to those episodes too, because I've listened to those and they're powerful. They really are. Aside from that, I know it's kind of like hijacking a little bit of it, but that CSST, after I learned what it was, like, I also learned that one of my really good friends, like, thank God nothing happened to a fireman in this one, but their house, burned because of the same thing, lightning strike, and it caught fire. Same thing. So there's a lot of good information at it from a firefighting standpoint that you should really know about it. And a couple things that I really just like, I don't have to ask you any questions about that call because you highlighted it and you said everything that I was going to ask you about. And the reason why I say that is because I really wanted to make sure that people understood that everything that we've talked about today really played a role, and you went through it and you walked through it and you lived with it. And it was an unfortunate outcome, but it was a successful rescue, if that makes sense. Like, it was a successful rescue, but it was just an unfortunate outcome due to whatever reasons that we don't know. And I think that if people could once again, it's a form of data, right? Like, that is, and in a world that we really just don't have enough information about RIT and Mayday and stuff like that, like calls like that really highlight it. And that's really what I wanted to highlight. It was just the stuff that you were talking about when it comes to the psychology of it, the mental fitness of it, the physical fitness of it, really does play a role on those days. And the trust, I mean, everything was so interlocked and intertwined in that call. And man, I appreciate you just sharing the recap of it, especially being the RIT team leader and what you guys faced through it. I think that was awesome.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that the opportunity.
Yeah, man. Josh, I want to be respectful of your time. I have had a blast because I learned a lot, and it's mostly because, like I said, I'm a little bit of an undercover nerd, and I have some more stuff that I want to pick your brain about, and we'll do it on another episode, or I'll reach out to you personally. Yeah,
for sure.
But thank you, really do. Thank you for coming on the show and sharing what you know. And I think it's added extreme value to the fire service and probably given even more background and data and psychology to what people already kind of have a hint about now, because it is breaching out into the fire service a lot.
Yeah, no, thank you, man. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm always trying to put stuff out there. I've got a lot of behind the scenes work that I'm doing. And I've got all kinds of projects going on. They're passion projects for sure, but I appreciate you letting me give some insight and nerding out with you, man. It's always an awesome opportunity. So thank you.
Yeah, man. And if people want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Yeah, so I have Instagram is Forged and Unbroken Fire, and I also have a second Instagram page, In Extremis Readiness. And those are the 2 pages that I run, just kind of really focusing on the research and all that. Forged and Unbroken Fire at gmail.com is my email. And I tell everybody I answer everything. It just depends on what's going on with family. That takes priority. And as soon as I can follow up with you, I always try to get data or answer any questions I can. I also have a Patreon community. And if it's something that anybody's interested in, it's $6 a month. I try to make it affordable so it can be as inclusive as possible. And it's daily workouts. Every Monday, I put out a growth mindset episode talking about a small bite-sized chunk of this research, physical, mental, emotional stuff for the fire service. There's early access to the podcast. I do mobility videos going back to injury reduction. I do deep dives on some aspect of fitness, so that way you're better prepared, or we reduce injury, or we fix an injury. And I post a video every Friday on that. And then 1/3 of all your membership goes to a public safety, nonprofit, or charity cause every quarter. And then I also do a give back to a member, just a random drawing as a thank you for being part of the community. So those are a lot of the things I get involved and wrapped up in, on top of all the other things I do as a husband and dad and officer. So, and a coach in my community. So it's a lot going on, man. But I'm trying to give back to the profession that has given me and my family so much. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, man. And no, I appreciate you, and I appreciate what you're doing to the fire service. And speaking personally here, like, I've learned a lot from your social medias and from some of your podcasts and stuff. So keep going. Don't stop. People like you are important. So I appreciate you. Appreciate you doing what you do. So guys, real quick, if you found value in this episode, please just do us a favor and share. We don't have sponsors, pretty much self-funded. Not that it costs a whole lot of money or anything like that, but that's how we get the word out. That's how we get people like Josh's word out there to other firemen that need to hear it. So just share the show. Other than that, man, we have a good lineup coming up. Stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed on all the socials, on all the YouTubes, and make sure you're following Firefighter Nation for future streams. So we appreciate your time. We'll see you on the next one.
Remove carcinogens and get your gear compliant clean with Unimac laundry equipment. Find it at alliancelaundry.com/fire.